Welcome, everybody, to the Big Sky Now podcast. Hopefully you missed us out there. We were transitioning from the football season, and now we're at basketball season. We're at the halfway point of the season, so we're kind of putting you up to date on what has happened so far and what we expect going forward. So me and John Allen, my co-hosts, are going to do our best to bring you up to speed and then also give you some topics on what to look forward for the rest of the season as we're right in the middle of conference play. A very exciting time, just a month away from March Madness. So we're going to try to break down what has happened in Big Sky basketball up until this point. So at the top of Big Sky, we got some teams that we kind of expected to be there. We got the Montana Grizzlies. They're up there. Northern Colorado, we expect them to be good. Maybe not this good as they're currently leading the Big Sky, but they're also Montana's right on their heels. But the surprising team, probably more than any other teams, the Portland State Vikings, who are surprisingly in third place. They were picked to finish near the bottom of the standings. So all of those three teams, John, what do you kind of think has been the team that's been the most surprising, or the team that you kind of think is doing exactly what they're expected to do, or what do you feel with those top three teams at the top of the conference?
Yeah, I mean, Montana and Northern Colorado, it's kind of business as usual. They're always towards the top half of the conference. You know, they always seem to bring in big players, but whether it be through transfers, whether it be developing freshmen, Montana's got, Money Williams, who's absolutely gone off this season at times, 27 points against Tennessee early on in the non-conference. Maybe not as much here in the conference play. I know he ended up actually coming off the bench against Montana State a little over a week ago when they played the Bobcats. But, you got Brandon Whitney, who's been a mainstay with the Grizzlies for years. You've got Malik Moore, who's the leading scorer on this team, and I don't feel like he gets enough recognition when it comes to that. Then you got guys off the bench like, Aaron Johnson or Kai Johnson and Aaron Williams, I believe is who I'm thinking of. Aaron Patterson, sorry.
Patterson, yeah.
And, but, they've all kind of got their roles. As for Northern Colorado, I think I don't want to say they took it by surprise because, like I said, they were preseason number 3. They're always towards the top of the conference, but it's kind of open this year, and they've really taken advantage of the games early. They put the beat down on Montana in Missoula.
81-57.
They escaped against Montana State and Bozeman, 83-82. Beat Idaho State by 1 in overtime. The loss came on a buzzer beater from half court from Idaho. So they'll be 9-1 in conference, and that's your only loss is saying something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's Portland State, like you mentioned. They're the surprise. They've stepped up their game. They've lost 2 games over the last weekend against Montana and Montana State. So when they've play some of the top teams, you're going to get that occasionally. But they've definitely been a surprise, and they've found themselves in the top half of the conference right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, too, with a lot of similarities between all three of these teams is their makeup of their teams are very similar, where they have balanced scoring. Like they have, I think, both the Grizz and the Bears, they have 4 players on their team each that are in double figures. So they're getting a balanced attack. I think Portland State either has 3 or 4 as well. But I want to talk a little bit about the Bears, just you knowing this conference a little bit better than I do. Has the Bears always been this kind of like offensive powerhouse? I mean, they're averaging 81 points a game, but the thing that really stood out to me is they're shooting above 50% as a team. Has that always been how the Bears offense is ran, or is this year just a little bit different with this team?
Yeah, I think they've always had good scorers on their team. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Dalton Connect.
Of course.
He stepped through Northern Colorado there for a year after transferring from junior college. So, they've always had good scorers, and they've got it again this year. But, they've it's just kind of, I don't want to keep saying it, but it is kind of business as usual because it's just so open.
So something that we could talk about that's maybe not business as usual as the teams that are kind of struggling or not maybe where we expected them to be at this point in the season. Montana State Bobcats are one of those teams that we could talk about. And then Weber State, one of the other things we could talk about. I know Montana State, they lost Robert Ford, but people like Brandon Walker, Patrick McMahon, they're all stepping up as well. And as well as transfer Max Agbonkpolo. Did I get it right?
Yeah, Agbonkpolo.
Agbonkpolo. That name has been rolling on my tongue all day and I probably still pronounce it wrong. But why are the Bobcats struggling? We know they have a pretty good defense, and they're second in the league in three-point makes, but it seems like a lot of the players that they lost, but the players that they have this year, they're not quite contributing at the level that we expect them to. What is your opinion on what's up with the Bobcats right now?
I mean, it's just a bunch of moving parts. I think they're still kind of reeling from losing Danny Sprinkle a couple of years ago. I mean, I know last year they came out and won the Big Sky. It's also still, it's going to be a 4-year kind of moving process, though, when it comes, I guess maybe less so now with the transfer portal and everything, but when you get a new coach in, it's not the same situation all the time. So you do have that rotation of players, and a coach is going to take a little while to get his guys in there. So I think they might be reeling from that a little bit. Other than that, I think they had a very difficult first part of the conference schedule, falling to 0-3. The Idaho Eastern road trip is never easy because it's such a close proximity. Those rivalries they mean a lot to those teams, regardless of how teams are playing. So you kind of fall behind with that. You have the game against Montana, and then you have Northern Colorado and Northern Arizona who come to town, and those are two difficult opponents. Got Northern Colorado, who, as we mentioned, have been great all season. And then you got Northern Arizona, and they've got two of the best players in the conference.
Exactly. Yeah.
They might not have the wins and losses, but they do have the talent there.
That's very true. Good point.
I think that's just a big thing with it. And if you look at their recent schedule now, they've won 4 of their last 5. The only loss coming to Montana in that first brawl of the Wild. So, they've got it together now. They're 5-5 in conference, and Montana State's putting themselves in a position to get back into a good position for Boise and maybe make a run to their 4th straight NCAA tournament.
Let's transition to the Weber State Wildcats. They lost 2 of their top 2 scorers. That's never going to be easy to replenish that quickly. But one thing that's kind of a concern to me is looking into preparing for this episode as Blaze Threet. He's kind of leading the team in all the categories. He's leading them in points, rebounds, assists, and he's a guard. I feel like it's always a little bit concerning, in my opinion, when you got a guard leading the team in rebounds. But also, Weber State is the worst three-point shooting team in all of the Big Sky. What is going on with the Wildcats, and do you think that there's still enough time in the season for them to kind of get things right, or is it just more very similar to what Bobcats are doing, where it's just like it's going to take some time to kind of replenish that talent they lost?
I think, we kind of mentioned it earlier too. It's an open year for the conference. Anybody can step up. Anybody can kind of fall down. There were 4 different teams that got first place votes in the preseason polls. So, and a lot of those votes went elsewhere. Montana State led one poll. Montana led one. Northern Colorado was 3rd. Weber State was 3rd. It kind of mixed and matched for who you wanted at what position. So I don't think that it's that big of a deal with in terms of, maybe talent and just kind of progression or anything. But, like Blaze Threet is a great player. And so it doesn't really bother me too much that he's getting in there and getting the rebounds and everything, because guards nowadays they go around everywhere. Russell Westbrook's 6'1", right?
Yeah, 6'4". He's 6'4".
Is he 6'4"?
Yeah,
okay, so, but there's some guys out there,
and he's a freak athletically. So
sure, there's some guys out there though that are 6 foot and getting into the paint and getting rebounds. And triple doubles are becoming more and more common. So I don't think that it's that big of a deal in that regard. I think they definitely would like to see a bit of their bigs coming in, but I think the biggest thing for Weber State right now is Miguel Tomley. He left the program January 28th with an injury. He was preseason All Big Sky. So they said it was a health condition. They're not sure if he's going to be back before the end of the season, but he tried to play throughout the entirety of the year, but it just wasn't able to happen. So I think that's one of the big things for Weber State. They're not a full squad, and they maybe haven't been healthy that entire time. So that's kind of maybe worn on them a little bit more.
Yeah, those are a lot of good points. I like that how you brought that up, because I was not aware of Tomley. Because of college, it's so hard with their injuries. They keep them so discreet. I do think when tournament play starts happening and with the second half of the season starting, or of conference play, starting, you're going to need, Weber State's going to need their bigs to step up. It's one thing for a guard to get 6-7 rebounds a night, but if he is leading your team by getting 6 or 7 rebounds a night, that's just not going to cut it when you have some of the talent that you have across the Big Sky with a lot of their players. So yeah, a lot of good points that you bring up with Weber State and Montana State, but there's still a lot of games left. A lot can change. I know that the top 2 teams are kind of at the top of the conference, but one bad week of play and you're right there in the mix. And then the seeding will matter once the tournament starts too. And we saw what Montana State did last year, winning the tournament. I believe they were one of the lower seeds when they went into the tournament. Correct? So
yeah.
Anything could happen. Once we've seen March Madness, we know what happens during March. Is the reason why it's called March Madness. So there's still hope for both the Wildcats and the Bobcats as the rest of the season plays out. But speaking of the season, there was a lot of preseason favorites that were expected to win. Just so I don't get it right, we got Trent McLaughlin from Northern Arizona, who was picked to win the MVP. Right now, that looks like they got that right. He has been balling in NAU. Then they had Brian Goracki of Montana State, Brandon Whitney from Montana, Miguel Tomley from Weber State, who John just mentioned, and Brandon Walker from Montana State, and then Julius Mims from Idaho. Out of all these players, where are they at now in the season? Like we already mentioned, McLaughlin has been playing well. Tomley's been dealing with injuries, so he's not really getting a fair shake. He's obviously a big piece that's missing for Weber State. What about the rest of these players? I know that Julius Mims has been struggling, but a big part of why he's been struggling, he's just not getting the minutes. He was playing 29 minutes last year. This year he's down to basically 19. So there's just a big difference for him. But as far as like Garacki, Walker, Whitney, what are your opinion on those guys? And are they meeting their preseason expectations, or are they kind of falling behind the ball?
Well, I'd like to start with Garacki because I feel like last year for Montana State, he was such a big key in them making run deep. You know, he hit some big shots, 3-point, just a well-rounded player, I guess, in total, but was there to knock down shots when you needed him. And this year it just kind of feels like he's not as needed in that role. And, they've got Walker, they lost Robert Ford, yes, but they've got Agbankpolo, they've got Walker, they've got just kind of a mix of everything that you would need.
They're more balanced.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word that I was looking for there. It may be, like we said earlier, hasn't kind of panned out early on in conference play, but they're starting to get it together and playing well. So, they've set themselves up now to be towards the top half of the conference. And all you have to do is get hot at the end of the season and you can make that run.
Yeah, I think just taking a shot in the dark here, if I was to guess where we're at in the midpoint of the season in conference play about where those guys stand, I think McLaughlin has still got his spot. I think Brandon Walker has played good enough where he's got his spot. And like the player we mentioned earlier from the Wildcats, Blaze Street, you got to mention him as well. When you're top 3 in your category for your team for everything, you're going to be getting some votes for a preseason favorite. And then another player from Northern Colorado is Isaiah Hawthorne. He's having a great year. And then Carson Tout from NAU, he might be a sleeper pick because NAU's record may not be where they want it to be, but he's averaging a double-double. And someone who's not far from him averaging double-double is Idaho State's Jake O'Neal. He's averaging 9.5 points and 9.8 boards, I believe. And then another sleeper I had was Dylan Darling from Idaho State as well. He's kind of like a Blaze 3 where he's leading his team in points and assists, so he's a guard who just kind of dictates the pace for the Bengals. And so those will kind of be my guesses on where these guys might end up. But I think, there's only 5 that's going to make the first team. So I think I gave you 7, so that might not be too right. Do you have anybody who you think who might not have been on this list, who might have catapulted to it?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Hawthorne, he's definitely stepped up. I think you can argue that he's a big reason of why Northern Colorado is where they are at now.
Yep.
Threat's been good, even though Weber State hasn't exactly played the best. Northern Arizona doesn't get the wins, but as much as they should, it's very similar almost to their football program where, they're right on that edge. They're right on that edge. They're able to get some wins. They're able to string together some good games, and then they fall when they shouldn't. But I think that's a different conversation for us. And then Idaho State, again, just kind of as a team, I think that they're kind of one of the surprises that we didn't really talk about. But yeah, just, O'Neal, you said almost averaging a double-double.
Mm-hmm.
That's, very solid. I mean, Tout's one of the best rebounders in the conference or in the country. So
I think he is the best in the conference. Yeah.
So there's definitely some big guys out there that deserve some recognition. And, as for maybe some guys who aren't performing that were in there, Brandon Whitney, he's always there for Montana, but he just doesn't put up the stats, I think, the way that they thought he was going to as a graduate this year. And Montana's finding it from other places too. Like we've mentioned, they have 4 players in double figures, so it's not reliant upon him, but he's always one of those players that they can depend on in a key moment. So I think that does kind of play into it. Mims is kind of maybe struggling for the minutes, but compared to what he had before, I think that kind of all plays into it. But, it's always a guessing game with those preseason awards. So it's college ball. Players aren't going to play the same from year to year, and other players are going to shine out. So,
yeah, and I think just kind of to wrap up this little overview we have, just with the talent that NAU has, they may not be where they want to be with their record. They may not be where they want to be in their conference standings. But with the talent they have, I guarantee you that once those seedings start happening for the tournament, teams are not going to want to face that team. They have the talent to get hot at the right time. So they're still in the mix. But I do want to transition to the women's side of things, because if people have not been paying attention, the Montana State Bobcats women's team has been playing out of this world. Besides the top dogs in the conference and all of the country, UCLA and South Carolina, the Bobcats might very well be the the third hottest team in the country. They're 20-2 overall, 10-0 Big Sky Conference play, 13-game winning streak. They're doing it on both ends of the court. Is this surprising to you? The Bobcats team is playing this well. I know they got some good transfers in, but they look like they have a serious shot, and we'll get more into this later about their schedule this week because they're going to be tested this week. But is this a team that can really go undefeated in Big Sky play?
I mean, I think they can get through this week. Like you mentioned, the test coming up against Northern Arizona. If they can get through that, yes, I do believe that they can go undefeated. Is it going to be easy? No. They've had difficult games against Eastern Washington twice. Montana played them to a 1-point game in Missoula. But they've also had their routes. You know, are they coming off, a 35-point victory over Sacramento State or Portland State, one of the two, I believe?
45.
45? Yeah. They ran them out of the gym, and the game before they had a slow start and still won by 30 or 25. So, you know, they're doing it well, and they're able to, you know, put together the wins in the tight games and blow out other teams that they need to. Esmeralda Morales has been playing incredible for them. Mara Dykstra was preseason all-conference also. So, you know, they've got the players, and I think that battle with Northern Arizona is going to be a really big one this coming weekend. I do want to say I'm kind of disappointed in some of the national media for not seeing them. I know, you know, South Dakota State just squeaked their way into the coaches poll.
Yep.
And I know South Dakota State women have always kind of been good over in the Summit League. Florida Gulf Coast, though, also getting some votes in the coaches poll. Montana State beat them and ended their home winning streak this year. So why aren't the Cats getting any talk in this?
That's a very good point. That's something that, like, I just look at it as 13-game winning streak. You already should be on people's radar, but you're 20-2. And the two losses they had, they're not to bad teams. So they don't have that, you know, everyone talks about strength of schedule in college hoops, especially when it comes to seeding for the tournaments and stuff. But you can't really talk about the Bobcats and say, oh, this might be a blemish. The two losses they had are the teams that, you know, kind of expected them to lose to. But I think the main thing with the Bobcats is why they've been so successful is because it's not just offense with the team. You know, they're not just getting it done on offense. They're also the best defensive team in Big Sky. Now, they got a 17-plus point differential, which is by far leaps and bounds above the next closest one. I think NAU is the second most, and theirs is around 8 or 9 points, I believe, if I'm going off of my memory. But that when you're a team that can do it on offense and do it on defense, you're going to be in every single game. And we'll talk a little bit more about the NAU game that they had that they picked up on the road last time. Very close game, but Montana State pulled off. And now that the Lumberjacks got to come to play in the Bobcats arena, I would be remiss if I didn't pick them as a favorite to win. But I do want to talk a little bit about NAU as well, because they had their MVP for preseason ranks in Sophie Glancy. She's been playing incredible. So shout out to whoever was the Big Sky Conference preseason voters for MVP. I think you got them both right so far. We'll talk about the rest of the players later. But she's been playing really good too. They're 18-5 overall, 9-1 in Big Sky play. So they're even as good as the Bobcats are playing. One loss, NAU is right back in the top of the conference. So how do you feel about this team and where they're at in this season?
I mean, I feel like they're also playing very well. They were the preseason favorite when it came to it. So, you know, it's not too surprising to see them at 9-1. Yet they've got, as you mentioned, Sophie Glancy. She's an incredible player. I also want to give a little talk about Leah Beatty, because this is kind of a rivalry within itself, because Beatty played 2 seasons at Montana State, and that was in her second season at Northern Arizona. So, you know, there's a little bit of a, I don't really know if it's exactly bad blood or anything between them, because students can transfer for whatever reason. But, you know, going up against your old team and your old friends and teammates, it's going to lead to, you know, a different feeling on the court than when you're just going up against, you know, Northern Colorado instead of Northern Arizona like they will this weekend. So, that's also something that kind of plays into it. But these two are far and away the best teams in the conference for women, and they definitely play like they are, and show it on the court. And you kind of mentioned with Montana State that scoring differential. They seem like a team that this year has just been able to, when they feel like it, stop you from scoring. They just decide you're done.
Yeah.
And go on a run. And they did that to Eastern Washington when they played in Bozeman. I think Eastern Washington led by 8, and Montana State ended the game on like a 16-0 run and just kind of took it over. So yeah, it's just when you're done, when they don't want you to score, you're done.
Yeah, it seems like that women's team for Montana State, they just have a switch that they can turn on whenever they need to. But before we move on to the exciting matchups that we have this week, I do need to show some love to the women's Idaho Vandals team as well. Nobody picked them to win the conference. I think from what I saw in the coaches and the media polls, they were ranked towards the bottom. The coaches had them 7th overall. They're currently sitting 3rd, and they're doing it kind of with the same makeup as Montana State and NAU. They don't have the same prolific scoring that those teams have, but they're 2nd in defense and they're 3rd in offense. So they're getting it done on both sides of the court too. As this Vandals team kind of came out of nowhere, or have you kind of seen this team go in the direction over the last couple of years?
I think the Vandals have always kind of just been towards the top since they came back to the Big Sky. I know a few years ago it was a lot of Montana State and Idaho kind of battling up at the top. Montana State's been up there recently a lot as well. And I think Northern Arizona's just kind of pushed their way into that battle now. But it doesn't surprise me to see Idaho up towards the top of the conference. In that same regard as what you're saying with Idaho, wanted to give a shout out. I kind of want to give a shout out to the Montana Lady Grizz also, because they started off the season. They kind of struggled in the conference play early on, but they've won 4 of their last 5 now, with the loss being a 1-point loss to Montana State at home. And so
doing it with the interim coach.
Yeah, and Nate Harris taking over for Brian Holsinger with, I don't know exactly what's going on there. I just know that Holsinger has taken a leave from the team. So Harris has stepped up. That team looks like they're playing, they look like they're having fun on the court now. They look like they're just kind of free flowing with it. And it feels like this change has almost been better for the team.
Yeah. All right, so that was our best job of giving you the overview on where we're at in the season right now. We're going to break down what we expect this week and a lot of exciting matchups on the women's and men's side. We have to start with the matchup that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, the Grizz playing the Bears. We already know that they lost to the Bears 81-57 in their last matchup. Now they have them, and then they have NAU coming, so we'll dive into that. But I want to talk about the other games that are slated that are going to be great games and exciting as well. We got Montana State. They have a tough matchup on the road against NAU. And then they play Northern Colorado after that. Are we confident this is like a point in the season where the Bobcats can kind of get things right? I believe they're 5-5 in conference play, so they're not playing too terrible. I think they're 10-13 overall. But these are 2 games that I think if they were to pick up, maybe even split this series, but pick up both of these wins, then we kind of start talking about them in a different light. And then the other team that we got to give love to is the Portland State Vikings team. They face Idaho before they face Eastern. They could move up to 2nd place if the Grizz don't handle business against their matchups. If the Grizz happen to fall to the Bears and then happen to fall to the Lumberjacks as well, we could be talking about the Vikings as the 2nd best team in the Big Sky. So out of those games on the schedule, what are you most looking forward to in those matchups? One thing I do want to talk about with the NAU or the Northern Colorado, matchup with the Grizz, when they lost by 24 their last matchup, their players that you mentioned, Moore, Williams, they didn't shoot the ball well. They're not going to win again if they have those kind of rough shooting nights. But what are you expecting in these matchups with Portland State, Montana State, and the Grizz of what to expect this week and how the conference will kind of shake up at the end of the week?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this has got to be considered the game of the year for the conference at this point with Montana and Northern Colorado. Montana's got to come in there and play like this is for pride, even because you just got beat by 24 on your home court against Northern Colorado. So you need to go out there and show that was, a fluke, I guess would be the best way to term it. So, and I think that one's kind of the one that everyone's had their eye on. We all know what these teams bring to the court. Like you said, they didn't shoot well. It's an easy fallback. You got to go out there. The coaches around here always like to say, you got to see the ball go through the hoop. So Montana definitely needs that. Yeah. And moving over to the Bobcats, I think that these are a couple of huge games as well for them.
Especially Northern Colorado.
Yeah, Northern Colorado, of course, because they almost beat them back in Bozeman.
Yeah.
But Northern Arizona is a game that they need to get to keep momentum going also. Like I said, they've won 4 of their last 5 in conference play. They've moved themselves back into contention at 5-5, and there's a lot of seeding mixture around that 5-5 level right now that they can move themselves up and see themselves up towards the 3 seed towards the end of the season if they do that. But you can't drop games against teams like Northern Arizona, Weber State, Eastern Washington, stuff like that. So that's a big game for them that they need to go out and win. Portland State and Idaho, I think that's going to be
it's going to be better than people expect.
Yeah, that game I think is going to be a real battle. It's 2 teams. It's kind of a coming and going game as well because Idaho's had their moments of being solid this year, knocking off Northern Colorado. Portland State's been very solid to start conference play, but they just come off 2 losses. So it's going to be how can they rebound this weekend and if they can get back into the win column because they've outperformed their early season predictions and I'm sure that the team wants to keep that going.
Yeah, and after their last 2 losses, this is a perfect chance for them to kind of show the voters and show everyone who's paying attention to Big Sky that the way that they started the season wasn't a fluke. So they can get right back, and if they can knock out teams like Idaho and Eastern, teams that they should win, then we're going to start talking about this team we already are talking about them, but we're going to talk about them in a different light if they happen to leapfrog the Grizz over this weekend. Moving on to the women's side of things, they have another big matchup as well. NAU played the Bobcats last time they played each other. The Bobcats pulled out an 87-81 road victory over the Lumberjacks. Are we expecting this to be another close game, or do we think with how well the Bobcats have been playing that they're kind of just going to flip that switch once again and kind of take control of this game at home?
I think that's the biggest question of this is Montana State going to flip that switch and just take control of this game? I expect this one to be back and forth like the first matchup was. Montana State did have to battle back against Northern Arizona at home. So I think going down to Flagstaff, it's going to be a very similar situation for Montana State. They're going to need to now also weather the conditions of not playing in your home gym. So that's always a difficult, scenario when you add that in. Not every game's going to be at home. Not every game's going to be on the road. So, but yeah, no, I think that this is going to be a good one. It's going to be a nice battle between the two, and it's really going to be I think this will be what decides the conference in terms of seeding. Montana State wins this one, gets a 2-game lead. I think that they can, you can't cruise, but I think that it kind of solidifies their spot as the number 1 team in the conference. So,
oh yeah, I don't think that's even a question. If they win and they improve to 11-0, and now you got NAU with their 2 losses being to the team that's 11-0. They should be a shoo-in to finish the season in that same seed. But something you did talk about earlier that I want to shine a little bit more light on is the Lady Grizz. They're playing some of their best ball this season with their even with their interim coach. But they do have some tough matchups this week. They got Northern Colorado as well, and then they play NAU. They could be playing NAU after a tough loss to the Bobcats, so they might be getting the NAU team at a bad time. Or maybe it's the reversing, and NAU pulls out the win, and they go in and maybe play a little bit down to their competition. So what do you expect them for the Lady Grizz? Do you think they continue playing the good basketball they've been playing, or do you think that they kind of run into some better competition this weekend and come back down to where they were at the beginning?
I think that they're going to keep playing well. I do think that will continue on. I think that they'll be able to take care of business against Northern Colorado. But Northern Arizona, like you mentioned, it's going to be kind of are they going to be coming off of a loss? Are they going to be coming off of a big win? It kind of looks like it might be one of those trap games we always brought up in the football podcasts, Yeah. Well, going to Cal Poly, who's only won 2 games on the season when you've got Montana State the next week. So it feels kind of like one of those games where the Lady Grizz might be able to pull off a surprise if Northern Arizona's maybe got a little hangover from a loss or a win, and we're just haven't prepared for Montana in the way that they should have.
Yeah, a lot of good points. Hopefully we did a good job of getting everyone up to speed on the season. Basketball is a lot different from football. There's so much moving parts going on week to week. But going forward, we'll be breaking down every matchup in the Big Sky, both men's and women's big matchups as far as what to look forward to as well. And hopefully on the women's side of things that the Bobcats keep it rolling, because it would be great to see a Big Sky team get into the rankings and I think if they extend that winning streak to 15 come Monday when the polls come out, they got to get some sort of love. Even if they don't make the top 25, at least receive some votes. Give some love to the Bobcats team. They've been playing great. But great matchups this weekend with the women Bobcats team, the NAU, and then Montana against Northern Colorado. So you got both teams at the top of the Big Sky conferences matching up this week. So it's going to be a great week. We'll have all those recaps for you next week. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you to my co-host, John Allen, for being with me. Thank you for all tuning back into the Big Sky Now, where we're switching to basketball. And we'll see you all next week on another episode of Big Sky Now. I've been your host, Josh Amick. Take care.